This week on To the Contrary.
First, women candidates and voters have a lot of clout in the upcoming midterm elections. Then, can female Marines cut it? Behind the headlines, the new conservative feminist.
Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, women and the midterms.
15 female Senate candidates are running in next week's elections. Only 2 are considered sure winners. Maine Senator Susan Collins and Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia, both Republicans. In Iowa, one of 2 states that never elected a female governor or sent a woman to Washington, Republican Joni Ernst is courting the male vote. And gender is an issue in the tight race in Kentucky between Allison Lundergan Grimes and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. There are 160 women running for U.S. House seats, but that doesn't break any records. However, depending on the outcome of a number of tight races, the Center for American Women in Politics says there just may be a record number of women members come January 2015 and the next session of Congress. 36 states are electing governors. 9 women, 6 Democrats, and 3 Republicans are running. 4 of them are running for re-election. The only other woman governor is not eligible for re-election.
So, Congresswoman Norton, how will women candidates fare in the upcoming midterms?
Bonnie, women candidates are virtual outliers, not part of the establishment. So with the public in a dour mood, I think women stand a good chance this election.
I think Americans are looking for leaders, whether men or women, who are going to reflect their priorities for them and their families, not Washington's agenda.
There's so much outside money being poured in from corporations. It's going to be harder than usual for progressive candidates. But I think the women will do as well as similarly situated men, if not better.
And we're seeing some strong conservative candidates who are showing that it's really not about traditional women's issues, it's about all of our issues.
All right, well, we know everybody's saying the polls are so evenly split. I mean, look at the Mitch McConnell and Allison Lundergan Grimes in Kentucky, where it's a virtual tie, and Kay Hagan, who was thought to be going to be wiped out in this election, and now she's running even. So it all depends not so much on the polls as on the get out the vote effort. Who's got the better one?
I think Republicans have a pretty strong effort this time, and I think they're realizing they have a strong opportunity to be able to take the Senate. And whether it's youth organizations or women's organizations, they are getting out there, they're getting the right candidates out there, and they're getting the vote out.
Well, for good reason. Democrats have had the leg up on get out the vote because they represent the people who are least likely to vote, the ones who have profited less from the voting experience. But in an off election like this, it is very difficult. Early voting, however, shows that very expert GOTV get the vote out is working.
I know in past elections, I mean, this is said publicly all the time, the Republicans' GOTV effort has not been as strong as the Democrats, that they may be running more ads, they may have more money, but they don't, run the buses from the churches to the polling place, or from the houses to the polling place.
Yeah, they do.
Well, but I mean, what's different this time? And particularly, what's different about reaching out to female voters by Republican candidates?
Well, what's interesting about this time, I think, is that people are really fed up with Washington and the establishment
That's
agenda.
Not new.
But I think
that's been going on
but we have,
since Reagan.
What we have had as a result of this administration and the Congress is a very Washington-centric agenda. You've seen more health care decisions move into Washington. You've seen a more centralized education agenda with Common Core. And there's a backlash. People want these decisions to come home. Let me make healthcare decisions in my family. Let me make education decisions at our local district level, not send all those to Washington. And we've seen more centralization of decision making in this administration.
I'll also add that Harvard just released a poll of young voters and the most likely to vote, and they tend to skew Republican. And so I think what we're seeing is, from the youth perspective, a lot of young people who are a little bit disenchanted and kind of tired of Washington as usual, and the ones who are really motivated are the ones who are going to turn out, and they happen to skew to the conservative side.
So you're saying, in essence, and is there a difference between male and female among these young voters in the Harvard poll?
I'd have to look at the numbers. I don't think that they may have broken that out by gender, but it tended to be that overall young people will be liberal, but those who are most likely to vote on Tuesday, they tend to be Republican. So
these are the voters with cell phones. And this is, and one thing we know is that where the pollsters slip most is with predicting who will come out to vote. And part of the reason, a very big part of the reason, is not only cell phones, but many have cell phones from another area where they don't live or vote anymore.
Exactly.
So in terms of predicting, the only prediction I think we can do is to look at those early voting results.
But and the early voting results so far are skewing Democrat, right? Okay, which is unlikely in a year when you would think that the Republicans are going to pick up seats in the House, as the polls predict, and quite likely take over the Senate.
And we see that in younger people too. It's obviously not a test or a poll, but my college...
Well, young people don't have landlines anymore.
No, in terms of the polling, that's exactly true. My college daughter, who lives in North Carolina, I've never discussed this race with her at all, and yet she made her banner photo on her Facebook page, Kay Hagan. So I think that says something to me about where young people are and how seriously they're taking this election, at least in North Carolina.
Now, what about if you were advising the GOP on how to get young women to the polls, and young women generally are less likely to vote in an off-year election, how would you go after that vote?
Yeah, and I think we saw that polling this week that said non-married women are very apathetic about this election. So I think some of the tactics that liberals have been trying to use are not getting connection with the women. I think what will bring things home is the idea of security for the future, for them, for their children. And right now we're spending...
Not jobs? When we still have relatively
that's part of
high
security, absolutely. So we need a thriving economy now to be employed. We need to get spending under control because we've got an entitlement crisis that threatens the safety net very soon, and especially in the future. So if we want to be sure of our futures and be sure of those in need around us, we got to get serious about making wise decisions in Washington.
Eleanor, how about all those women who, since the last election, now have Obamacare coverage? Are they going to go to the polls because they're so happy with their new health insurance, the way Republicans might draw young women to the polls who don't want to pay extra, larger premiums?
You can't go on the Affordable Health Care Act because, my good colleague here will argue that, some people's insurance has gone up, so they'll go to the polls. And I will argue, and there are people, millions of them, who have health care for the first time, who were indeed middle class and still couldn't get it because of pre-existing conditions like being a female, and they can get it. So I think that's almost a wash. We won't know until the exit polls tell us what people voted on. And the fact that the Republicans are no longer pressing the Affordable Health Care Act the way they were tells me that they don't believe either that people are going to the polls based on the Affordable Health Care Act.
How about all the negative ads and the sort of attack ads? And I'm really surprised by that woman running for Congress in Iowa, Joni, I castrated so many pigs. Is that going to draw? I saw that, quite frankly, and I was revolted. Now, I don't live in Iowa, so I don't have the perspective of an Iowan, but is that kind of an ad going to draw women voters to the polls?
I can't speak to the efficacy of that ad, but the issue that it's getting at is real. That, you know, pork barrel spending here in Washington is detracting from real priorities, and making sure we have a safety net that is actually secure for the future. Making sure we have decisions in health care that are not making millions of Americans lose their insurance, and that the vast majority, 70% of Obamacare's expansion of coverage has been Medicaid expansion. So we're moving more towards government subsidized and
Do you
controlled
think
health
the
care.
average person understands or is affected by that?
And they know, a lot of them know somebody who lost their coverage if they didn't lose their coverage themselves, lost their doctor. And these were promises that we were supposed to be able to keep.
Well, and a lot of young people feel higher premiums. On average, the increase in premiums for young people, it's 44% for young women, 90% for young men.
They are subsidized. Almost all of them are subsidized.
But we should also challenge whether, as taxpayers, we should be subsidizing something that is affordable. So I think it's
Not
something
for these
us
young
to,
women.
to
You couldn't get it
consider.
if it were affordable for them. You know, you're subsidized only if you can establish, and by the way, your IRS forms are right there before the government, that you cannot afford health care. Health care is very expensive. And that's one of the reasons that the subsidy is so important. The very people you were talking about are the most subsidized, young people.
And we'd all be better off if we had Medicare for all and a single payer system the way most of Europe does. And because it's the insurance companies in the middle that are taking big profits and a big bite out of it, and we're paying the price. But the Affordable Care Act has lessened the impact of that, but still not enough.
Last question to everybody. Why are 3 of the 4 women senators up for re-election vulnerable? And of course the 3 are Democratic women, and Susan Collins, the 4th, the Republican, is a shoo-in for a re-election.
I haven't been watching the horse races closely enough, but I hope the reasons for that people are taking to all these are evaluating people by their record and looking at how they match up with our values.
They're all from red states, meaning they're all from Republican states. The luck of the draw this time is that more of the Democrats were from Republican, not just Republican-leaning states, Republican states. So they're ahead in the horse race to begin with. That's why for Democrats, GOTV is everything.
And in those races, do you think that early voting will be correct and the polls will be wrong?
I'll give you an example, because she's been vulnerable ever since she came to Congress, Mary Landrieu.
Yes.
Don't bet against that woman.
Here, here. That's my home state. I'm counting on Mary.
Okay, we'll be watching on Tuesday. Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay or at To The Contrary. From women candidates to women in the military.
Only 3 female Marine officers attempted the infantry course this year. They've been asked to leave after failing to complete training. No woman has completed the course since the Marines began accepting female applicants in 2012. These women had passed the grueling first exercise, succeeding longer into the 13-week course than any women before them. But they could not keep up on 2 long hikes while carrying up to 120 pounds. About a quarter of male officers fail the course each year, but so far the majority of women do not make it past the first day. This has renewed calls for the Marines to change their standards to accommodate women.
So, Jennifer Marshall, and I know you're just probably salivating at this question, but should the standards be changed?
Absolutely not. The mission of the military is to secure to protect our national security. And so this is not about us as individuals and fulfilling our dreams. This is about keeping our country safe, and that we must have a standard of excellence that everyone in the military can trust, and that we as citizens can trust as well.
I mean, is it sexist to set up a standard where only 25% of men fail, but so far 100% of women have failed? Or is that just smart tactics on the part of the military? Because Marines need to be stronger than other soldiers.
This is not inherently sexist, and I'm not willing to throw in the towel yet. The reason is that notice that 3 women failed. 3 men failed too. Don't take that to court and expect to get anywhere with it. However, notice also that none of the men were able to walk with that load in the time that their command set. They all were slower than that. The problem is that 3 men and 3 women were even slower. There may come a time and how do you know when they jack up what you're supposed to do, and already we know that they have changed the standards. What made them change it in the first place? That there may be a scientific way to go into that and talk about the standards. But I'm not ready for the first women. My hat is off to them. I didn't expect the first women to make it through. But I believe when you see what women are doing now, and in the short run, not the long run.
Are they getting stronger over time?
Absolutely.
I know
they're doing things.
Everybody's running faster, everybody's
lifting more.
Right.
They're doing things that women in my generation would have thought almost unladylike.
Yeah, or impossible.
Yes.
But I think you want to make sure that the standards actually relate to the job that needs to be done, because we went through all of those decades where women were prevented from being police officers and firefighters based on standards that really had nothing to do with being able to do the job. They were standards that were created to make it impossible for women to compete. So we want to make sure.
Do you think the standard then for the Marines is sexist?
Well, I think we don't, it doesn't have to do with sexist. It has to do with whether it's a standard that is appropriate and necessary to do the job. For instance, this was a 3-hour hike. It took virtually every participant, all of the men, 4 hours to complete the 3-hour hike. So the 3 women and the 3 men that were pulled out, maybe they were even, clearly they were even slower than 4 hours. But if it took the entire group 4 hours, then there's something wrong with the standard that says they have to do it.
Well, I'm not sure. You see,
well, why didn't they flunk everybody then?
Exactly.
They didn't flunk everybody, you know, because they were they're marking on the curve, and I don't think that's unfair. But you know, it's much. Let me give you the best example I know. I went with a 107-year-old female veteran who was in the WACS, one of the first to join, happens to be one of my constituents. I asked the president to meet with her. She is the most feisty woman you have ever seen. Now, they didn't let women in, and if they had given women any kind of test then, they would have failed it. I just think it's too early to evaluate this. These first women are pioneers, and we ought to be emboldened and heartened by the fact that these 3 made it through the first tranche. They were the first to make it through the first tranche. And I think in very soon, there's going to be a woman, and it may be only one, who will go the whole way. And she will encourage other very strong women to come forward.
I agree with you. I mean, I think it's wonderful that we're seeing women striving forward, and it doesn't mean we need to change the standard. And also, it's too early to assess if the standard is right. If it's right. I mean, 4 hours versus 3. What is the time period? How can we compare it to some past results to see? Well, every year.
Well, there probably are 3 and 4 and 8-hour marches in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, where the Marines have to go carrying 120 pounds. So it may be the right test.
It's for real, yeah. I mean, if the Marines have a reputation for anything, it is for facing very grueling circumstances.
But does it really matter whether it takes 3 hours or 4 hours? I mean, I think that's
sometimes
you have to be able to
do it. Sometimes it matters in a life and death circumstance. So I think we need to be very careful about questioning these military standards that are for the purpose of securing our nation.
They don't even have a statistically large enough sample of women to even begin to evaluate this yet. That's why I think it's very early on to draw conclusions.
Right.
What do you think is wrong with separate standards for men and women? I mean, women are not as strong as men. We know that. There are some, you know, incredibly strong, incredibly fast, incredibly able to lift weights women out there, but why not, if they can be there and they can go in combat and they can do everything else, why not lower the standards for that hike only?
Because I mean, I think it inserts a level of distrust among the other soldiers who have worked hard and proven that they can reach that level. And when they're out in the battlefield, they're going to rely on the next person next to them to be able to carry the same weight and load that they can. And if they're going in thinking, well, the barrier was lowered for her, so I'm not going to be able to rely on her, what does that insert in the actual situations among the soldiers themselves? I mean,
as you watch women coming up in sports and athletics, and competing more closely with men. How long do you think it'll be before young women can match those standards?
It may not be long, and if they do, that's great, but there's a reason why in Ironman or the Boston Marathon you have men's races and you have women's races, and to this point,
and they're women. I have a
reached
friend in her 50s who does Ironman for her age bracket, not Iron Woman. Behind the headlines, modern feminism. Independent Women's Forum executive director and to the contrary panelist Sabrina Schaefer says there's more than one way to be pro-women and girls. Schaefer told us progressives and Democrats don't always get it.
The progressive agenda for women shows that government is the solution to every problem. The women's agenda on the left is really limited to reproductive rights, children, and maybe the workplace.
In Lean Together as opposed to Lean In, the Independent Women's Forum describes an alternative women's agenda that Schaefer says is empowering because it focuses on the positive.
The message that's being portrayed now is that sexism lurks around every corner. Not only is that not true, but what a terrible message to paint for young girls.
IWF scholars focus on issues ranging from healthcare to agricultural policy and affordable energy. The premise is all issues are women's issues.
What we want are sensible policies that are going to allow our economy to grow, that are going to allow job creation, and also allow women and their families to have the greatest freedom of choice.
IWF is nonpartisan. Schaefer takes issue with Republicans as well as Democrats. She charges the GOP with failing to communicate with women because they don't take gender differences seriously enough. She's disappointed that libertarians and conservatives have failed to sell women on the value of limited government.
It's so easy to see what government gives us, right? A higher minimum wage, maybe expanded health care coverage, a new school lunch program. What's so much harder to see is what's taken away when government grows, whether it's under Republicans or under Democrats. The civic society that is lost.
IWF scholars who contributed to the book say the marketplace is where to find answers to failed economic policies.
Realize how many of these laws, as good as the intentions may be, may backfire. They may not only hurt women, but they may hurt men. Pushing for laws like the Paycheck Fairness Act. While the intentions may be good, it's premised on faulty statistics, and the ramifications of laws like the Paycheck Fairness Act would be very damaging for women. It would actually make the workplace less flexible.
Schaefer hopes Lean Together will motivate women to work for government that meets their needs rather than dictates.
Nowhere in the book are we saying that we should eliminate government's role in helping people. We're saying that we can be a lot smarter about how our government operates so that we don't crowd out our communities, so we give local governments more control, and so that we allow people to have a stronger voice.
So, Patrice, and thank you for being on this panel for this book. How is this different from traditional female conservatism? What are you guys saying that Phyllis Schlafly didn't say 30, 40, 50 years ago?
I think we're saying that there's a greater opportunity for efficiency in government, and that may be true of what she said in the past. But we're saying, you know what, there's some really great opportunities now in this generation to be able to deal with the social problems that we've always had, but do it from a private perspective, not just relying on the government or using the government as the first source of all solutions. I mean, I think the challenge that we've had over the past probably 30 years with feminism and progressive feminism is that it paints women as victims and girls as victims of everything. And that's not to dismiss the blatant discrimination that we see on a regular basis, but it is to say, well, there's something wrong with if the government solution is the best solution. And unfortunately, we've fought a war on poverty, we've fought a war on drugs, we've fought a lot of wars and have still not seen a decline in poverty that we need to see. We still see too many single mothers struggling to raise their families. We see too many young people who are unemployed and looking for employment. And so what we're trying to say is we can work together with communities. The real solutions are going to start at our kitchen tables. It's going to start in our corners when we're walking our dogs, talking about there's a problem here. We can come together and we can solve it. And there is a role for government, but the role doesn't have to be a leading role.
Forgive me if I say that's a bunch of platitudes. I mean, there is no solution for a single woman who has only herself and her children, except some help from the government for child care, some supplement for the Affordable Health Care Act, perhaps even some food stamps. We've got women in 2 or 3 jobs, leaving children catch as catch can. It's really an insult to women to say that the first thing they do is to look for the government. The first thing a single woman does is to look to her own mother and to say to her, you want to know who really is taking care of the children in my African American communities? It's the grandmother. So the whole notion that the first thing they do is to go down to the hand-me office really insults women, and especially single women who are having the hardest time in this society.
Very briefly.
What I see low-income mothers who are facing challenges wanting first is the safety and security and future of their children. And so what they're looking for is
What
a
about
safe and effective.
education?
Yeah, that's exactly
So
what I'm going to say.
education,
A safe and effective school for their child to attend. That's why the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program has been so important. That's why the school choice chapter in here is so important.
Okay, I got to
It's
interrupt. We're out
holistic.
of time. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week. Sorry.